So it's a little after 12:30. Miles and David, are you ready if we get things going? So I just want to welcome all of you. I'm Gina Strunzi. I'm your host for this session. I'm also the organizational administrator for APSI. So it's nice to see some familiar faces and some new faces here. So glad you're with us. I think by now we've all gotten the hang of Zoom. So I'm happy to see that I think all of us are muted. It's the best way to hear our leaders. So you are in the workshop, Presbyterian Disaster Assistance Story Ministry, using story as a teaching tool. If this is where you wanted to be, you're in the right place. If you didn't want to be here, it's okay if you leave and go to the one you did want to go to, but know that we'll miss you. So I'm going to turn things over to David Barnhart and Miles Markham.
Hey, thank you, Gina. We're so glad to be here with you all. I've always loved APSI, and I believe Christian educators are such an important part of the church and our work together. So it's awesome to have you here, and for us all to be together and have this time. And we're grateful, really grateful to APSI to give us this time to talk about story ministry. First, I want to say that interpretation is available. So there's a toolbar at the bottom. And for those who need that, you can choose your language, and Jason will be there to assist with interpretation. So there's a toolbar at the bottom, and you can choose your language. So I think just to start out, who am I? And Miles will also introduce himself. My name is David Barnhart, and I'm my pronouns are he, him, and his. I'm an associate for story ministry with Presbyterian Disaster Assistance. I'm a cradle Presbyterian. I grew up in the church. I was forced to go to choir as a kid. I didn't sing too well, but I loved church and grew up in the church. I was at youth group at Montreat, and I ended up being a volunteer at Ghost Ranch in New Mexico. I was a young adult volunteer. I was also for PDA for a while. I was the Latin American liaison for PDA. And so my whole life has been, I've grown up in the church. I've lived with the church, and I just know how important Christian educators are. And so I'm happy to be here with you all today. And Miles, go ahead.
Thanks, David. My name is Miles Markham. I use he, him pronouns. And as I shared with some of you all who were early to our workshop, I am a recent graduate of Columbia Theological Seminary. I am not a cradle Presbyterian, but a recovering Southern Baptist. I found the PCUSA as a part of a theological deconstruction, reconstruction, lived experience, and I am happy to have found a space that is more accommodating and inclusive, not just to various identities that I hold, but the identities of many people I love. And I'm now working for Presbyterian Disaster Assistance alongside David, not just within story ministry, but with our broader national disaster response network. So I will be co-facilitating today. My passion is around using film as a tool for social justice. And so I'm hoping to be able to share some of that today. So David, if you could go ahead and maybe just give some background on PDA and where NRT and story ministry fits into all of that.
Yeah, sure. First, I actually left off one of the most important things about me. I am a super proud and super tired father of twins. So that is a huge part of who I am. Forgot to say that, can't believe it. So yeah, as Miles said, let's take a step back first and kind of give you all context talk a little bit about PDA. So what is PDA? It's the Disaster Response Ministry of the PCUSA. We're supported by the 1 grade hour sharing offering. And Presbyterian PDA is enables congregations and mission partners of the church to witness to the healing love of Christ through caring for communities adversely affected by crisis and catastrophic events. And a lot of our work, focuses on and is committed to long-term recovery. That's a huge part of PDA. PDA doesn't just go for 2 months or 3 months or 6 months, but will commit and work with the community for years. And that's a huge part of what we do. We provide training in disaster preparedness and mitigation. We provide trauma work as well with presbyteries and synods to try to equip presbyteries and synods to be a part of that process of recovery, and also be able to be a partner in the community through those events, those disaster events. And everything we do is in partnership. That's a huge part of who we are. We work with local churches, we work with nonprofits, we work with national organizations, international organizations, Red Cross. There's a list of them there you can read. United Nations, FEMA, all these different programs that we work with. But partnership is real important. We don't go anywhere we're not invited. We are always invited into a community, and we walk alongside the partners that are there, both national and international. So let's go on to NRT. The National Response Team, just my experience personally, is an incredible group of volunteers from across the country who all specialize and are trained in certain to respond to certain disaster events, whether they be fires or tornadoes or gun violence or all these different things. We have a group of volunteers that do that, and they're just an incredible group of people. They provide support to presbyteries and synods as they assess the impact of the disaster, both on the church and the community, and they assist in connecting to people to resources and to churches to resources to respond. I remember one time I was at an NRT event, and I was sitting at the table, and at that table there was maybe 10 people, and it was 10 different people who had responded to different kinds of disasters. People who would respond to fires, to hurricanes, to gun violence, and to all these different areas. And it was just, to me, it was incredible to be at that table with that group of people and to hear their experiences and to learn how they walk with communities through the process of recovery. So that's an incredible group of folks. And I encourage you to look into that if you're interested in being a part of the team. That is a possibility. We're always recruiting people to be a part of that team. Everyone is a volunteer. Story ministry. So the short answer to that, what is story ministry? Is story ministry or story productions is a ministry that is committed to story as a means to facilitate congregational and community engagement. And some people always say, so wait, why does PDA have a story ministry area? Where did that come from? PDA has always recognized the power and importance of narrative and story, working with communities impacted by all kinds of natural and human-caused disasters. And we have been invited to walk alongside communities in that process. And when we listen to our partners and the communities we work with and we walk alongside, we learn very quickly that these disasters don't happen in a vacuum. They don't happen alone. There are always systems and policies and structures and underlying issues that make communities more vulnerable to disaster. And when we truly listen to those voices of the community, to those impacted, to the people most impacted, those layers have to be, those layers of systems and structures that make communities vulnerable to disaster have to be a part of that story. And so we have experienced the value too and the power of other congregations and communities and schools and universities, film festivals, museums, conferences across the country, gathering to hear these voices and stories and to learn more deeply about these issues and reflect upon, how can we as a church or people of faith respond and be engaged? We've been very intentional about the idea of congregations and communities actually gathering around story and each bringing their own stories and experience to this conversation. And so the hope is that like these films that we produce and these stories that we work on, we want them to be able to continue to cultivate wider circles of community around trauma and around disaster. So, I always say that these really aren't films that we produce, they're resources. They're resources for community engagement, intentionally for communities to gather around story, have dialogue, and to figure out how can we respond. And so how we work in story ministry is actually kind of exactly how the National Response Team works, and also PDA kind of applies across. We work in partnership. Story and filmmaking are rooted in relationships, and so that comes first. We only go where we're invited. We only go where a community says, please come and work with us to document and tell the story. It's a long-term commitment. Like I was talking earlier about PDA, we commit to walk alongside communities over years. The Flint film that we recently produced with the community in Flint was over 5 years. Kepulian, which is a film about long-term disaster response in Indonesia after the tsunami in 2004, was a 10-year project. Trigger, which maybe some of you have seen, is on gun violence. We worked on that over 7 years. And so, each of our commitment is just like with PDA, it's a long-term commitment to these communities. And so that's a very important part of how we work. And the other one too is local ownership. And what that means is any project that we start, any story project that we start, we don't go with an agenda. The thing that we try to do is go and listen to the community. And so, for example, with Flint, the first few months that we worked after the crisis started, the water crisis started in Flint, we went and spent 2 or 3 months just meeting with the people that were living this experience every day and trying to learn from them. And so we spent time with teachers in schools. We spent time with people that were working at water stations that were giving out water. We spent time with pastors that were visiting people that had been poisoned by lead and were doing home visits. And so we kind of let that voice be the voice of the story and kind of let it guide us. And that's one of the things I love about the story ministry work that we do is we don't know where it's going. And what we want to do is be guided by the community that we work with. We want to go first to listen and let that evolve. And so we listen and create space for the story to be what it needs to be. So why film? I think first, I'm going to talk a little bit about story and why story, because I think that's a good place to start, and what role can it play in education. So our story ministry is rooted in 3 guiding principles, really, 3 things that we really try to follow. Story is fundamental, story is sacred, and story connects us. And story is fundamental is where we start. And so I remember Dr. Rhodes, who's quoted here, was a professor that we had. And one of the things I remember him saying is on one of the classes that we had, he said, story is as basic to human nature as eating and sleeping. Our life experience has narrative quality. We live life and we share our stories. So story is this fundamental thing that we live with every day. It's as basic as eating and sleeping. And one of the things that I think we do a lot of times is we use story to find meaning and to rationalize our decisions and to figure out, when you think about it, when someone says, oh, why did you decide to do something? Sometimes we have a story around that. We kind of story our lives. Dr. Rhodes talked a lot about that. We story our lives to rationalize what our decisions we make, the steps we make, the reasons we believe what we believe. And so really it's an essential part of our life and our way of being. Story is sacred. Story and narrative are obviously a core essential part of our faith. I mean, we're an oral tradition passed down thousands of years, and when you look at Jesus too, and over and over and over, when Jesus was challenged or questioned, what did he do? When he was challenged on anything or questioned, he always used parables and stories to inspire, to question, and to challenge dominant narratives of the time. A lot of those narratives and dominant structures of that time dehumanized and marginalized people. There were systems and structures that made people clean and unclean and not worthy and worthy. And so when you look at the Bible through that lens and through the way Jesus responded, I mean, he really used story as a way to challenge these structures and in ways that we try to, exclude or to marginalize people outside of the beloved community. And so I think, ultimately, I think Jesus was trying to connect us all in this beloved community, and use story to kind of to plant the seeds of community. And so, in a lot of ways too, when we talk about story, we're not talking about just passive listening, but engagement. It's a call to gather. It's sometimes what we like to call it is a spiritual calling. It's a spiritual calling for the church. We have to be willing to listen and try to articulate or put words to that which is sacred. Which brings us to number 3, which is story connects us. stories do have the power to divide us, and we can definitely see that now. But they can also carry the seeds of community, and it can move and connect us. Dr. Rhodes used to say that, and I'm reading his quote here, the story is not just a vehicle or a component added to an idea. The story itself has energy and power. The story affects the whole person, the heart, the soul, the mind, the body. Words do not just have meaning, they create effects. Words and stories are speech acts. Sometimes, or something happens to us and to the audience as a result of hearing and experiencing the story. And I remember, and to prove his point, Dr. Rhodes, one of the first days in class, he literally walked in and then walked around the room and recited the whole book of Mark from his memory. But he did it as a story. He didn't have the book. He didn't have it in front of him. He just walked and looked at each person and told the story of Mark. And he had memorized the entire book. And it really, I mean, I had read Mark 1,000 times, honestly. I had read it, I'm a seminary student as well, from McCormick. But to hear Mark as a story being told was incredibly powerful, and a bonding experience for our class. And he quickly made his point. So, stories do carry the seeds of community. They are powerful tools for connection, reflection, relationship, and collective engagement. And they really do connect all of us. So as Christians, what is our calling with story? In this current context that we're living in, of polarization and fear, what are we called to do here? That's one of the questions that we ask ourselves a lot. And many of the purveyors of story right now are media outlets that they're largely driven by profits. And what do they want? They want more clicks. They want more clickbait. They want more. They want to drive up ratings. They're driven by profit. And what happens when that's the focus? We get fear, we get misinformation, and we get polarization. So I think as a church, we can shift to story as a calling for all of us. And what we do is we share from a genuine and a sacred place. We tell the truth as a means for inspiring and connecting broader circles of community around. Dr. David Hooker, he's at Notre Dame, talks a lot about how stories have the power to counter or challenge dominant narratives that are embedded in support oppressive systems and structures in our society. And so one of the things that we tried to do with Flint when we worked with the community in Flint was we didn't go, we really tried to focus on, as I was saying earlier, the voices of the people that are not being heard, the people that are at the water station that are handing out water every day, the teachers in schools, the pastors visiting people, the doctors who are seeing children, the pediatricians who are seeing children in the emergency rooms, and we just wanted that voice to guide the film and that truth to be what we shared, and so that listening, I think, is really important. And so this process continues with through the phase of, so once we work with the community, we have a story project or a film, and this process continues with the phase of congregational and community screenings and events where the films are used as resources to gather people around an issue and to humanize or tell the human story and to be a catalyst for conversations and congregational engagement. I'll use Flint as an example again. With Flint, when we finished it, the first thing we did was take it back to the community, and we shared it with everyone that had worked with us over 5 years on this film. And so we shared it with them, and the response we got was, yes, we want to share this wider. We want to share this with the city. And so, over like 4 or 5 months or so, they organized a premiere in Flint with the people, with the community there. And then the idea was, well, let's take this and we're going to share, and we're going to screen this in cities where they're dealing with water issues. And so we reached out to people in those cities and had people that were working on water issues, water justice issues in Atlanta, or dealing with coal ash in Atlanta, or Iowa with industrial pesticides, or all these different cities. We chose cities that were dealing with water issues. And the idea was to bring people who are working together on that issue in that city, and to use the film and the story as a gathering place for everyone to come together, hear the stories. And then we had the leaders in Flint the community leaders who worked with us in Flint present the film, and they explained, told the story and explained it could be a part of that conversation, because they really should lead that conversation. And so the actual gathering around the story and to hear the story is not a passive act. It's not let's just go see a film or go see, it's this, you're coming with purpose. You're coming to be active. You're coming to listen and to connect. Dr. Greg Ellison, who's at Emory, has a book called Fearless Dialogues. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of him and read this. Fantastic book. I love Dr. Ellison. But he talks about how, when we gather, he talks about gathering with a purpose, and how when we do gather around stories, there's always undiscovered connections and purpose that lie dormant in the room. And I remember he described it as a living ecosystem. So when we gather, we each bring a story, we each bring a purpose, we each bring something into the room that's going to connect us. And so we intentionally invite those gathered to allow connections to be made, and to be made to your own narrative and your own story experience. Because ultimately, our faith is a living faith. It's dynamic, it's evolving, it's changing. Our stories are living and dynamic, each one of us. They're not static, they're not trapped in one period of time. They're continuing to evolve and change. And so one of the things that we always talk about when we share stories and when we gather for screenings is that, we're still writing new stories about what it means to be a Christian today. We're still writing new narratives and new stories about what it means. And we feel like the church is called to this work. And so now I'll let Miles go ahead and talk a little bit about why we have worked in film.
Yeah, so like David mentioned, story is a powerful force, both in terms of the spirituality of it, how it connects people, but also because it creates such a specific and a unique entry point. It brings about empathy in a way that is different than just hearing or just seeing. The combination of that audio visual has really struck a chord with audiences, even in a polarized, political climate. The next sort of section here, though, is specifically about access of film as a means of telling story. And I suspect that other workshops have touched on this, but where hosting virtual events can be seen as a necessary evil right now, we wanted to touch on some of the real upsides to hosting virtual screenings or attending virtual events. And the first of those, of course, is that it allows communities who, for any reason, who can't congregate to come together. It can build national and international partnerships. Virtual screenings can be transcribed for audiences in a way that includes visual cues, as well as being able to be translated into different languages. Virtual screenings and events can be recorded, and because of that, they can be uploaded to YouTube, to Facebook, to Vimeo, and people can participate asynchronously. This may seem obvious, but virtual screenings also decrease our carbon footprint. And lastly, perhaps the most compelling reason to me there's a real upside to virtual screenings is that they are usually free or low cost. And because they don't require as much time or energy to get to, your audience inevitably it begins to include people who traditionally it's just more challenging to get to a physical theater. And so in that way, we've seen these documentaries have their farthest reach possible since going virtual. But more than just telling you about this, we did actually want to show you an example of this being able to happen in a community. So I'm going to turn screen sharing over to David, and he's going to give a short intro to the video you're about to watch, and then you'll get to see a case study of story ministry come to life. David, you can
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, I will. So we're going to show you a case study, Dayton, Ohio. And the only setup I'll give this, or the only introduction I'll give it, is that this was started by one person, a Christian educator, who had seen a couple of the stories, the films that we had produced, and decided that she wanted to bring that to the community, and she felt it was urgent for the community to talk about this. And so over 6 months, from screening to screening is basically what she did. She screened it with all these different groups, and over 6 months, she formed a film forum that included all the churches in the community, the mosques, the synagogues, the Dayton Opera, the library in town, the colleges in town. Like, over time, she basically built together a film forum, and so this documents that.
Dayton is an amazing city. On one hand, it is a seat of a military-industrial complex with a major military base here in the community. And yet, many of the same people are very concerned about peace and justice.
Hospitality is the key to our community, and that becomes the core principle when we meet with other people, to welcome them and to offer them the most hospitable environment that we can. My community, Ahmadi Muslim community, is very, very glad that it gave an opportunity to really bond with other religious folks and other organizations, people that came, and gave us an opportunity to work together.
Thank you so much for having me.
I am a volunteer with Presbyterian Disaster Assistance.
Good evening. My name is Sally Dyer. 2 years ago, I saw Locked in a Box for the first time at our annual meeting and was just stunned by what I saw and what I didn't know.
I was shocked at what was in the film about immigration detention. I had no idea.
I thought, how is it that I can continue my life as I do every day? There are people within miles of where I live that are locked in a box, and it's just not okay not to respond somehow, some way.
I got online because there was a map in the film that showed all these red dots all around the United States of detention centers, and there were 2 in Ohio. Much to my dismay and shock, I found out that there's one about 30 minutes from where I sit right now. This is happening in our neighborhood. So I came back to Dayton and said, I really want to show this film.
That's why we decided, well, what if we put it in a nonprofit space that's kind of neutral? A college? What if we put it at a congregation? What if we put it at a mosque? The Peace Literacy Foundation is built on the idea that there is a way to work across the spectrum to build peace in the world.
What we are missing in our society is that we are so much used to getting our information in a soundbite. I think the gravity of these issues can only be appreciated if we take our time and fully try to understand. I think at the grassroots levels, education is the key, and education requires really sitting down and understanding the issue. Even if it makes us feel uncomfortable, the truth must come out.
When we see these films, we bring people to these events that can share their stories. And through the power of these stories, I think we can build a community that can figure this out and do some good.
I came to America, the first thing I remember standing at the homeroom, before the homeroom, and taking the pledge, liberty and justice for all. We can help by truly looking inwards and seeing, are we being hypocrites? How can we help these people who are out there, who have come through the deserts and through the land and through the seas to get to this promised land?
It brought about quite a few emotions in me that I had forgotten about. Refugee suffering is kind of forgotten and ignored. It made me feel kind of guilty also. But we kind of forget the price they have paid for the freedom.
There's stories all around us, but if you don't start the conversation, you'll never hear them.
They get into our heart, they get into our mind, and we can't get them out of our head. I think stories are a way that we can move away from the polarization.
And without the films, a lot of those conversations would never have happened. We need to open our ears and our eyes and our hearts.
Then we've got to speak truth to power in collaborative ways, and using a variety of voices.
She rises and goes to the fire.
What did you say your name was? Yep, I totally will. Can I get an E, please? Thank you. But something must be done. No documents. Try another consulate. I've been to every consulate in town. Everywhere the answer is the same.
Take time to let the full force of that strike you.
And nobody cares.
You have a huge opportunity.
They don't know what to do with me, it's to them.
Yeah, they don't know what to do.
I thought that was kind of no longer to her, but okay,
Yeah,
so
sing to the room.
them,
Yep.
like, listen,
Yeah.
they're not doing what they're supposed to do anyway.
Right.
Okay?
When I started to read the libretto, the script of the opera, the Consul by Giancarlo Menotti, I got goosebumps because it fits so perfectly in this time. The characters of the opera, these are people that we know. Our grandparents, our neighbors, people who experienced these experiences that the people in the waiting room of the consulate, where so much of this opera takes place.
So Vera's not happy. So you don't have to go all soft center to still say, I'm not having it either.
I cannot believe that this opera was written in 1950. This is exactly what's happening in our lives right now. This is just a reflection of us, because I came to this country as a foreigner, and I went through the whole immigration process. It's basically my story, my family's story. So this actually feels very close to me.
I think it really stirs the consciousness and the conscience of the audience, asks them in a sense over and over again, what would you do in this circumstance? Your reaction, you can take time to let the full force of that strike you. This piece is about the ability of the state to create a paranoia that forces people not to care about one another, to be self-serving, to do whatever in desperation, whatever they have to do to get what they need. Without changing a word or a note of what Menotti wrote, we're back to talking about people caught in the wheels of a mechanism of bureaucracy that is crushing them, allowing them to move neither forward nor backwards toward freedom or backwards toward safety. The story is literally ripped from the headlines, as they say.
She's not defeated.
No, she's a fighter.
Okay.
And she's desperate.
Okay.
When the theater becomes an empathetic exchange, when compassion is what's required, and when, frankly, outrage is stirred into action, then the theater is doing what its most powerful tool is.
I've been to every consulate in town. Everywhere the answer was the same. There's nothing they can do for me. And nobody cares.
Good.
Westminster Presbyterian has been a huge part of my life and my family's life. The support is here, and the church has been very supportive of this initiative. It takes one person to get the ball rolling. A wonderful, wonderful presentation. As we move forward with the screening, I really feel we've made a real impact here this week.
Films like this are very important for people to understand what's really happening. When you really look at the majority of people are not criminal, and we know that, and yet we treat them as criminals. We've had people for a long time to escape violence, to escape poverty, to escape all types of oppression. They come here seeking really asylum and asking for our assistance. We call them illegal immigrants, when in most parts of the world, they're refugee seekers.
It is a very complicated issue. Migration is not a simple issue. So we need better immigration laws, more comprehensive immigration laws. When I became a citizen, I applied for green cards for my brother and sister. Now, I applied in 1991. They got their green cards in 2005. That's 14 years of waiting. These people cannot wait 14 years. They cannot wait a year. They cannot wait 6 months. They are in such dire conditions that they need to make it somewhere where they can at least make a better life. Because it seems like everything else is important except the humanity part of it. And while the majority of Americans really are not aware of the stuff that's going on.
They incarcerated them, they held them in.
Right, why are we detaining them and spending billions of dollars where private corporations are making a lot of money, as are the people that are on their boards and their stockholders.
So when people, taxpayers, start realizing or recognizing that their dollars are being wasted, I think that's another type of language we can speak.
Locked in a Box is very impactful of showing us the underbelly of our lack of humanity as Americans.
And I think forums like this are a really good opportunity to think of ways that we can engage and inform our citizens and then take action in our own community. But action begins at home, it begins locally.
I really feel we've made a real impact here this week in Dayton, and I think other communities can do the same thing.
I'm going to use this movie as one of my stepping stones to get the people involved into the work that can change lives. That might be the start of something on grassroots levels.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Now, what happened in Dayton is obviously something that was pre-COVID, that was in a time where people could gather in person. But one thing that I previously mentioned and want to reiterate is that what you saw there can happen virtually. Of course, it is different, but because we've seen that go over well with a few different films over a few different issues, we actually created a virtual screening guide. It's a PDF document that is on our APSI webpage, but you can also find that through Story Ministries website on PCUSA's website, and I can go ahead and drop that link in the chat if you want to look. The virtual screening guide is available to you there. So we felt like it'd be a good idea to just kind of walk through what the steps are involved in a virtual screening. These can be of any size. It can be for Sunday school classes. It can be for any kind of small group. We've seen friends get together, who share a concern over a particular issue or wanting to learn together about any topic. And they've utilized a couple different features in order to make that happen. And so We're just going to kind of walk quickly through the basic overview of what preparing your own screening would look like. And that, of course, starts with choosing a film or a couple different films that you want to use. Through Story Ministries' website, you can find a full list of the films that are available to you, as well as how you can either download them or watch them online. So picking a film, based on what issues are relevant to your community is the first step. Second is if you're hoping to organize some kind of talkback that follows your screening, you might be interested in having a panel. And that panel can consist of experts. It could be community leaders. It could be people in your church or any education institution that you're connected to. But being able to identify, who are the people that you want to either be in your audience or to be able to provide some local contextual commentary on the issue that's being explored. The next consideration is when do you want to have this? So something that we like to keep in mind, of course, is time zones. When is going to be the best day of the week and the best time for the most amount of people to be able to attend? Are there holidays? Are there days of observance, days of memorial for different events that have happened in your community that this screening and this event could be in connection to? The next step is where, and by where, in this case, we now mean platform. And so what you can do, again, is reach out to us through the website, and you can screen share a film through Zoom. You can also set up what Facebook calls their watch party. So then together you can be simultaneously watching a film as well as chatting with each other. And then we actually have a couple films that are available through streaming platforms like Amazon Prime and Apple as well. And those two films are also available through cable networks as well. David will talk a little bit more about those films, but they're Flint, The Poisoning of an American City, and Trigger, The Ripple Effect of Gun Violence. The next step is intuitive to some, but it's probably worth naming. But when you are choosing your film or you're thinking about the issue that you're wanting to present to your audience, it's always good to name why you're showing people this film. Some groups we've worked with in the past have expressed that because they did not do that on the front end, they had people in their audience asking like, why does this matter to us? Why are you showing us this film? And so the more clear you can be about how this is relevant to your audience and to your local community, the better and more fruitful your discussion and any action items are likely to be. The next consideration is to prepare as much as you can. So again, you might not have a panel, you might not be interested in having a conversation between experts, but if you're just talking with your own group, it's good to think about the questions in advance and kind of anticipate emotional reactions. Many of our films contain sensitive subjects and material. We are talking and showing traumatic events, and it's likely that just by seeing those images and hearing those words, your audience is going to have different experiences in their own lives brushed up against. And so being as prepared as possible in terms of pastoral care or mental health services is always a really really good idea in planning an event where you're showing these films. The last kind of note here is to really make use of all the resources that are freely available to you. And so again, through the PDA website on PCUSA's website, you can find that virtual screening kit I mentioned, which covers everything I've talked about and more. We have study guides for our films, which contain lesson plans and discussion questions. We also have promotional materials. And so if you're hoping to post on Facebook, Instagram, or any other social media, we have digital files of like the movie posters and even language around how you can present, what the film is about. And then the last resource I'll mention is that coming this spring, we have a full curriculum that's being developed right now by the Office of General Assembly for an anti-racism docu-series. And so we have 4 episodes and a comprehensive curriculum that can be found online through OGA's Equip training website. So I'm going to let David talk a little bit more about the films that we have right now and what's available and where you can find them. And then we're going to let you see some of that anti-racism series. So David, if you could go ahead and share the issues.
Thanks, Miles. Yeah, one of the things that we've seen is that churches usually like to host conversations, and churches kind of become that gathering place. Before COVID, anyway, or virtually now. And so a lot of times it's connecting people with issues. People seem that what we've noticed is people really care about specific issues or some issues, and so a lot of our films touch or go into a lot of these issues: water justice and environmental racism, which is Flint, which looks at what happened. That five-year project that we did with the community in Flint, kind of looking at the impact and how it happened and why it happened, and how there's water issues in other cities as well. And then gun violence, which is Trigger. Maybe some of you have seen that film. And we've done Locked in a Box and To Breathe Free, which both look at refugees and asylum seekers and immigration reform and the for-profit detention system. We have trauma and pastoral care, following public violence. We have a film that we did with the national response team where they talk about the issues that a community faces after a traumatic the trauma that communities experience after a shooting, and how they respond over a long period of time. So we have a short film about that. Long-term recovery, we have several of those about looking at what happens when the cameras leave a disaster and the community is left still rebuilding and how recovery is long-term. And so we have films that look at that through the eyes of people that are rebuilding. And for Hurricane Katrina as well, we have one where we follow different families who are trying to come home over those 10 years. And also, as Miles mentioned, we have a new series coming out called Trouble the Water. And we really hope, I don't have to say this, but this is a resource we hope that can be used and is really needed now. And so it looks at the issues around race and racism across the church. And we hope it can be a resource for people to use. And it's also a collaboration across the church, across Presbyterian Mission Agency, Office of General Assembly, and it actually came out of a General Assembly mandate that these resources be developed. And so it's a 4-part series right now. We're hoping to add more episodes. And yeah, I think we're going to show you the trailer, right, Miles? Let me bring that up.
Yes, and just so everybody knows, we're going to have a few minutes for question and answers. And so if you just want to go ahead and start typing those in the chat, feel free to do that. And we'll get to as many as possible. But then David and I will also put our email addresses in the chat, and you can feel free to reach out to us as well.
Yeah, and that's something I really wanted to emphasize too, that Miles said. If you have any questions after this, or need us, or want us to help you, and you have some ideas for a screening you want to do or an event you want to do, reach out to us, email us. We're here to help. So
convinced that if racism does anything to human beings, is that it literally alienates us from ourselves, and it alienates us from each other.
If I am comfortable and racism is going on, that also means my brothers and sisters of color, their humanity is being traded for my desire to stay in a place of comfort.
When dominance is functioning at its highest, it's operating at a level that the folks who are in that place of dominance never notice that it's there.
It only serves to affirm the comfort of those who benefit from the construct.
You know, when we do that on a grand scale and over and over and over, we're really creating a huge crisis.
What makes conversations on race difficult is because not only do I have to tell you about what I'm experiencing, but then you'll probably put me in a position where I have to validate why I feel the way I feel.
Every group of people of color has experienced trauma.
When people are made invisible, I do what I can to help them show up, because I know what it feels to be made invisible.
Here, humanity was making a clean, fresh start.
And so I'm reminded every single time I go out of the power of community. That us as individuals, when faced by the magnitude of the problem of racism, we will cower. That I have learned people can be courageous when they know they're not alone.
Hey, Miles, did we want to show the page or not, the web page?
Yeah, David, why don't you go ahead and continue to share your screen just so folks can see what that looks like on the PCUSA website and know they're in the right place when they're looking.
Yep.
And looks, as you're doing that, David, looks like we have a question here about any effort in Canada. Are there any projects or any opportunities to be thinking about issues that impact Canada right now or coming up or have happened in the past?
There have been discussions about collaborations, specifically on immigration area films, but to my knowledge, there hasn't been, but there has been discussion about that.
Yeah, we welcome
Yeah,
the opportunity. You know, David mentioned a couple different times that our team only enters into a community upon invitation. And so if you or somebody is interested in having issues or response to disaster, whether human caused or natural, documented, we'd love to know about it. So please send us emails and we can explore the possibility.
And one of the things we've noticed too, and this happened recently, was that a community here in Georgia that has been impacted by ethylene oxide poisoning in their air from ethylene oxide saw the Flint film and reached out to the church and said, we would like you to come and work with our community to tell this story. The story is important. And so I think that's, to me, it was very powerful for a community who didn't really know the Presbyterian Church that well, saw our film and reached out to us and said, we have a story that needs to be told. We want to work with you. We want you to walk alongside us and work on this. And so we're starting the process of working with this community on this project. So yeah, I think definitely we can have people reach out to us, communities reach out to us that want us to work with them, and we can walk alongside. Here's
David,
the page.
Could you answer Bonnie's asked another great follow-up question. Who does the inviting to PDA? Is it local officials? Is it the presbytery? Or how do you get that invitation?
Well, it's all of the above. Sometimes it's through presbytery, sometimes it's through churches, other times it's from community groups like the group here in Georgia who's dealing with ethylene oxide poisoning. They reached out to us directly to PDA. And so, yeah, it's there's really no formal channel, but I think reaching directly out to PDA or emailing us at our reaching out to us through the website or with the email that Miles has is probably the best way to do that.
Yes.
And here's the page real quick. I just want to, so, you know, each of the, so Flint, you know, there's trailers here, there's clips here, there's study guides for each film. It's all here. There's posters, there's everything you need. The film, the short thing we showed you, the community engagement models here. So it's we try to put everything kind of in one place to make it user friendly and easy.
David and Miles, Judy's wondering if these are available for churches to borrow or rent.
Yes, actually, you can go directly to the links on that page, and you can download them yourself directly to your laptop.
Yes.
These are resources. We want them to be used as much as possible. So there's no fee. You don't have to order anything. It's all online for you to use, except Flint. Flint is the one, and also Trigger. Flint is on Amazon Prime right now, and it's on, that's been a challenge for us. The wonderful thing is that we've been put on platforms that are big platforms like Amazon Prime and all the cable companies in the country, which is great. But at the same time, it limits us with how publicly we can share. But we did negotiate that our churches can use the films. And so what you have to do is you have to write us, email us, and we can work out how we can send you a private link for you to download it with a password. So we just can't make it public, but we can send you Flint and you can download it and use it. It's also on Amazon Prime if you wanted to do that, but we've negotiated that because we really want this to be a resource for our churches. So we made sure that was part of the deal.
We have another question here and about 1 minute left. The trailer that you watched for Trouble the Water is available. And actually you can watch the trailer to all 4 episodes. We mentioned it's not the full episodes you can't watch yet because we're waiting on the curriculum to accompany those episodes, but all of the trailers are available through, I'll actually put this up here again. I
have the equip page if you want to.
Yes, you can, if you go to this website, pcusa.org/Trouble the Water, you can see the trailer for the whole series. You can also see the specific trailer for each episode, and you can sign up for the e-course.
Yeah, we have previews for each episode. So each episode has actually 2 preview clips. So you can see kind of what the episode is about, and you can share that to see if people are interested or want to use it.
It looks like we have maybe a few seconds here to respond to a question. Now I have, how do you get started getting people in the congregation interested? And I think it really depends on your specific context. And so if you want to reach out to me or to David, we can learn more about your audience, kind of about the history of what folks seem to care about, what resonates, what is kind of a hot button issue for them, what to stay away from. We welcome that conversation, and that's what we love to do, is to support you in your specific learning communities. So please reach out to us, and we can chat more about that.
And what I've seen over and over too is that it's one screening leads to another screening to it. I mean, when I say screening, I mean a preview. Like I've seen how Sally in Dayton, who you saw, she showed that to the session, and then the session said, we need to show this to the church. And so they showed it to the church, and then the church, well, we need to show this to our sister church over, and then the Methodist church. And so then they did a preview with the Methodist church. And so it's almost like gathering around story and sharing. It's just wider circles of community. As I said earlier, we watched that circle get wider and wider until, it had the mosque involved, the synagogue, the Dayton Opera, and all these different groups involved. But the pattern I've seen over and over is preview or screening leads to other screenings to other screenings. And so it's just a question of getting people together.
All right. Well, I think we are at time here, and we want to give people the space to take a little break before their closing session. You'll see in the chat link to the survey for this workshop. If you have time, please fill it out. It'd be very helpful to us, and I believe to APSI as well. Gina, do you have any ending notes here, or are we free to go?
I just want to say thank you. And Ruth Davidson in the chat had 2 more questions. And is it safe to say Ruth could email you, David or Miles, and get those answered?
Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely.
Yep. And please email us if you'd like to be part of our story network. We have a network of educators and community leaders and church leaders who are part of this network, and we'll connect with you directly, and we can send you any resources we have. We'll have a more fluid connection.
Thank you both. This was very informative.
Yeah, thank you. So nice to meet
thank you all.
everyone. Reach out to us.
See you
Thanks
all
very
for
much.
worship.
Thank you all. Keep doing your work you're doing.